All right. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. We'll get this started. Thank you for all for being here, for the folks who are online as well, for participating in tonight's discussion. We are fortunate to have a few members of the Army Corps of Engineers team with us who's been sort of helping the town along in the ongoing Section 206 study of the Royal River. I will let Janet, who's our project manager, introduce herself and the team. We're also going to give a brief overview of the project status to date, and then we'll get to sort of the meat of the presentation, which is, I think, why everybody is excited to be here, learn more about the H&H study that it was recently completed. And then really this is just an opportunity for folks to ask questions. And this is a sort of a, albeit a little bit unorthodox and not totally technically perfect, an opportunity to share your thoughts with the folks who have been working and doing a lot of the data analysis for the town in collaboration with the town. A couple housekeeping items. There will be sort of designated time for question and answers. So there's a pretty comprehensive presentation. We'll want to try to get through that. So please, if you have questions, hold on to them until we wrap that up. For folks who are online, we're going to keep a close eye. There's a raise hand function on your bottom center, I think, console. If you have a question, please raise your hand so we can make sure that we can acknowledge you. If you're on the phone, we'll do our best to reach you as well. I didn't introduce myself, but I'm Scott LaFlemme. I'm the town manager here in Yarmouth. And to my left is Karen Orenstein, town councilor. Together, we've been sort of working on the town's behalf with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Well, Karen much longer than I have, and Nat before me. But for the last several years. And so this is sort of an important benchmark in this process. So like I said, if without any ado, did I miss anything, Karen?
Nope, let's get
We've
right to it.
wasted enough time. Let's get to the good stuff. Janet, I'm going to send it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you so much for your patience. Modern technology is amazing until it doesn't work. So again, thank you for your patience, and thank you so much for inviting us to speak with you again about this project. We really love this project, and we're very excited to move forward with it. And I know you have lots and lots of questions about it. We love your enthusiasm, and we appreciate your love for the Royal River. So let's start, move forward. This will be interesting. It's a PowerPoint. So it's not a PowerPoint. It's a, thank you. Okay, so the folks that are here today, who, as myself, I'm the project manager and the planner on the project. We also have TJ Atwell, who is the deputy chief of the public affairs office. And we also have Tom Milbuckler, who is a civil engineer, and he is the one that has done all the amazing work on the H&H modeling that you're going to see today. But before we get started, I'll just say that we don't have the rest of the team with us. We will do our best to answer any questions that you have, but we may have to defer those questions to if they're too technical and we need to ask for the team's help. So I hope you understand that if we have to wait a little bit to answer, but we'll do the best we can. So the goal today is to give you an update where the study is, and then also to allow Tom to present the hydraulic modeling. So you could get a look at what we think the river will look like if we move forward with the project. So I'll start, just give you an update, and then I'll turn it over to Tom, and then we'll pop back to me to look at the schedule. Okay, so next slide, please.
There's a little bit of a lag, Janet, so just bear with me.
Oh, no worries. Okay, and again, sorry. Okay, so what have we done since the last time we spoke with you? Last time we talked, we shared information about the sediment sampling that had been done on the river. And I know that the town has kept you guys up to speed, so this may be a little bit of a repeat, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. So the bottom image is the process that we're going through, the feasibility phase. And we've gone through scoping, we've done the alternatives evaluation, we've selected a plan, and right now we're at that last arrow, the review and approval section. So what we've done so far is that we developed the tentatively selected plan. We had an internal meeting, a big one. It was called the TSP, Tentatively Selected Plan Milestone. That's when we get approval from our decision makers in at our division level that will allow us to move forward. So we got that approval. It was excellent. That approval allowed us to move forward and complete the draft detailed project report, DPR, and environmental assessment. We completed that, and then we began our first round of reviews, which is the district quality control review that happens at our district level, the New England district. Right now, we are currently addressing those review comments. Next slide, please. Okay, and just, I know that the town has, like I said, has kept you guys up to speed where we are, but I just wanted to go back over the tentatively selected plan to make sure everybody is aware of what we're talking about. So we have actions at 3 different locations: at the Bridge Street Dam, the East Elm Street Dam, and at Middle Falls. So at the Bridge Street Dam, we propose to remove the entire fish ladder and dam structure, and that we will remove the entire dam spillway and the stop log structures, but we will not touch the penstock. In the East Elm Street Dam, we will again remove the entire fish ladder, and we will remove the structure, the dam structure on the right descending bank. But we will maintain, so it will be about 120 linear feet of dam that will be removed. But the dam on the left descending bank will remain in place. At the Middle Falls section of the river, we will create a diversion structure at the top of the falls to allow more water to be diverted into the side channel. Once that has been completed, we will reassess and see if anything needs to be done in the side channels. There are a couple ledges, 2 ledges, that may impede fish passage, but we want to assess how much water moves into that side channel before we do any modification to the side channel, like chipping away rock. So we will the plan definitely includes the diversion structures at the top of Middle Falls, and then during the adaptive management phase, we will assess to make sure there is enough water that moves through the side channel. And now I'm going to, next slide, please. I'm going to turn this over to Tom. He has the majority of the information tonight to share with you.
Great, thank you, Janet. Can you hear me?
We can. Yep, thanks.
Great. So good evening. I'm Tom Milbachler with the Hydrology, Hydraulics, and Coastal section of the Engineering Division of the New England District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Today we will be reviewing a selection of the hydraulic study results that were performed for the Royal River project. You might have heard me talk about this project before, last March, or perhaps another time, and I'm excited to share the results today and to try to answer any questions you might have. On the screen are some of the primary takeaways that we predict, are some of the primary ways that we predict the river might respond to the TSP plan. We will work our way through the study reach, focusing on locations of predicted changes from the head of tide up to Baston Park at Route 9. Then we'll circle back to discuss Gooch Island in a little bit more depth. A full results package will be forthcoming along with the technical appendix that more completely describes the engineering methods, data, and assumptions. But as we all know, Mother Nature doesn't read maps or engineering reports. So the technical appendix will also discuss uncertainty and project risk in these results. Next slide, please. All right, so for this analysis, we used the Hydrologic Engineering Center's River Analysis System, HEC-RAS. version 6.4.1. This is a free, publicly available software developed by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers for use in studies like this. The two-dimensional computational engine evaluates the model domain with a mesh and is based on mass continuity equations. Specifically, the results I'll be sharing with you today are using the shallow water SWE-ELM equation set with turbulence. This allows the model to...
Tom, this is Karen Orenstein. I'm just going to interrupt for a second. I just want everyone in the room to know that we're going to have a copy of the slides for you. You don't have to try to write down, very small text that you're having trouble seeing. So just please try to listen, and you'll get a copy of it available on our town website later. Please go on, Tom. Sorry for interrupting.
Not at all. Thank you. So this allows the model to internally compute how much water flows in which direction whenever there is a flow split. And it also supports modeling various floods and tidal scenarios. It provides water surface elevations, depths, flow velocities, and the direction of the flow. The results represent different model geometries for existing and the TSP conditions. TSP being the tentatively selected plan. The model geometry is a representation of the river corridor. For this project, it is generally the same topographic and bathymetric data of the river environment, including bridges, with the difference being the dam structures, either matching current conditions or modified to match the TSP, plus the diversion at the middle falls. So the next step after we have built the geometry is to put the flow into the river. Next slide, please. And I'm afraid these next couple slides are going to be a little heavy on the engineering talk, but if you stick with me, we'll get to the good stuff soon. So the vast majority of the results we'll be reviewing today are based on the annual median average daily flow. This is the air quotes normal flow, if you will. You don't need me to tell you that there is a wide range of flows on the Royal River ranging from very low flows to extreme floods. The annual median daily average flow is not the average of that range, but is rather the most common daily flow year over year based on the USGS stream gauge at First Falls. At times we evaluate fish passage criteria for this project. We are focusing on the mid-May to mid-June upriver peak migration of the target species, alewives. We isolated the stream gauge's flow records over the years for this peak migration period and then fed a probability distribution so that we could quantify the range and frequency of the discharges in that time frame. We would expect more of the flow in the river during the peak upriver migration period on average. We use the extreme cases for evaluation. So the 95 percentile flow is the discharge that is on the low end of the spectrum and is exceeded by flows 95% of the time. Similarly, the 5% flow percentile is the discharge that is on the high end of the spectrum and is exceeded by flows only about 5% of the time. Occasionally, we are also interested in low flow scenarios. The 7-day, 10-year, which is 7Q10, annual low flow is based on the smallest values of mean discharge recorded at the gauge over any 7 consecutive days during the year. A probability distribution is fit to the annual series of 7-day minimums, and the 7Q10 statistic is the annual 7-day minimum flow with a 10-year recurrence interval. So that's why I'm putting air quotes and calling that the drought flow. We also develop flow frequency for flood events based on the stream gauge records as well, so that we can evaluate how the river may perform during those events. Finally, the flows recorded at the USGS stream gauge for the storm that occurred mid-December 2019 in conjunction with NOAA tide gauge records were used to validate the calibration of the model. And so on screen, excuse me, on screen you can see the USGS current gauges for the past year. Sorry, the stream gauge. This was accessed today, and it is showing the flows in the river for the past year. Now, one thing to note is that the units that you see on this graph are in cubic feet per second. So the normal average daily flow is 120 CFS. That CFS meaning the cubic feet per second. If you imagine what a cubic foot per second, what that represents is imagine a milk crate that's 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 foot high, and then that moves across the line in the span of 1 second. So it would be kind of like that, except 120 of them, worth of water moving through, perhaps over the first falls in any given second. That kind of gives perspective then for very low flows, such as the drought, which is only 25 CFS, or the fish passage migration season ones, which are varying between 62 CFS, which is about half of normal flow, or 641 CFS at the high end, which is about 5 times the normal flow. And then also looking at the storm events, you can see those are much, much higher events with the 100-year flood, or the 1% annual exceedance probability flood is the other technical name for it. That is at about 10,419 CFS. Next slide, please. The important thing, sorry, you don't need to back up, but the important thing to remember is that the vast majority of the slides that we'll have today are just looking at that most common normal flow. All right, so if you happen to have had the chance to see me one of the other times I talked about this project, you may recognize this plot. This plot depicts the water surface profiles following the model's stream center line for the full model extent from near Callan Point to near Baston Park. The y-axis shows elevation in feet and AVD 88. The x-axis is also feet, but at a different scale. Each one of the larger rectangle boxes you can see on the screen is 10 feet high by 2,000 feet long. The channel invert is shown as dark green. On the left is the estuary to Casco Bay. Then there is the steep breach between the head of tide at First Falls and going up to Elm Street. And then there's the impoundment reach between Elm Street and US Route 9. The existing water levels for the annual median average daily flows are shown as blue-green, and the TSP conditions are shown as the dark blue. This shows a predicted TSP drawdown upstream of the Bridge Street Dam of approximately 3 feet, reducing to about 1 foot before Middle Falls, and then matching through Middle Falls. And then again, once it gets up to the East Elm Street Dam, there's a predicted drawdown of approximately 4 feet, continuing up through Yarmouth into North Yarmouth. And then once it gets to the area of approximately Toddy Brook, then it would start to be reducing down to approximately 1 foot at the upstream end of the study area. Although not explicitly in this model, testing indicates that the impacts are unlikely to extend beyond the Wescostigo Park or the railroad tracks along Chandler Brook. Next slide, please. Okay, so similar to the previous plot, this plot depicts the predicted flow velocities along the model stream center line with velocity in feet per second along the y-axis. The x-axis is the same as the previous plot. This shows that the largest increases in flow velocity are predicted to occur generally in the steep reach between Elm Street and Bridge Street, with minor increases occurring throughout the East Elm Street impoundment. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll go through a series of side-by-side comparisons. These show flow depth with the existing conditions on the left and the TSP conditions on the right. You can see in the legend that the same color gradient is being used for both, with a light color for the shallow water, and then the darkest blue being up to 15 feet or more in depth. They both use the same horizontal scale as well. In general, comparing these two images, they appear to be the same. Next slide, please.
And just for context, people, so as we look at this, that dark blue area is where our navigational channel is. So that's what's maintenance dredged. So that would explain why it's deeper than the remaining portion of Yarmouth Harbor. And it's a little bit tough for you guys to see it here only because we want to make sure you can see the illustrations, but folks at home shouldn't have a big deal seeing that gradient key indicator on the bottom right-hand corner. So again, when you see this after the fact, it sort of shows you by depth. So it's color variant by depth there. So the blue being, darker blue being deeper than the lighter colors.
Thank you, Scott. Now, this next slide is slightly different. It is the velocity comparison. So the same location and the same extents as well. However, and once again, it's showing the existing conditions on the left, the TSP conditions on the right. And again, the legend has the same color gradient. However, the color gradient is different. For this one, the blue indicates that the water is moving slowly, roughly 2 feet per second or less. While if you, and you might need to squint, I recognize, and don't worry, we'll be zooming in here in a bit, but up near First Falls, you can see there might be some yellows, maybe a little bit of green there. That's just showing that the flows are generally in the 4 to 7 feet per second range. And then in some later slides, there will also be oranges and reds when we're looking at the flood flows, which will be in excess of 10 feet per second. Next slide, please. Okay, so now panning up to between the lower falls to middle falls and comparing the depths, we can start to see some differences. And again, we'll be zooming in just a moment. So just if you take in the general overview, looking at the left side is the existing conditions, the right side is the TSP. You can see some differences upstream of Bridge Street with some narrowing of the normal flows.
So just to orient folks, this is Bridge Street and this is US 1.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking at the velocities, despite the narrowing and the lowering of the flows, the velocities generally appear similar between these two images. There are some differences, and we'll zoom into Bridge Street next. Next slide, please. So zooming into Bridge Street, looking at the depths here, based on the available bathymetry, it appears that the river will stay near the center of the channel once the dam is removed in the TSP conditions. To help visualize some of the potential changes in this area, the plot also includes a faint yellow line in both of the images. Actually, it looks like the one on the left maybe has, it got bumped, but it's basically at the Sparhawk Mill lower parking lot. And we are comparing the water levels at that location. In this case, the existing, which is the blue-green, and the TSP, which is the dark blue, water levels are approximately the same here, each at about 1 foot of depth. One other thing to note, and this has come up during previous review here, is that sometimes the model results don't do a good job of showing cascading water. And so when you look at that left side image, it might not exactly, that is supposed to be the normal flow. And if you go out to a Bridge Street, that maybe doesn't quite look right. That's because the model is having difficulty with pretty steep slopes like that and the cascading flows. You might need to use your imagination a little bit to connect the dots on some of this. And that applies also then to the TSP flows as well, then on the right side of the screen in some instances here. So I appreciate your patience in working with me. Next slide, please. So looking a bit closer at the velocities in the Bridge Street Dam location. Once again, you can see that in the TSP condition, that the flows are more centered where the dam will be removed. But otherwise, in general, the flow paths and patterns are expected to be pretty similar. Next slide, please. Now moving upstream to US Route 1 and the Beth Condon footbridge, we see narrowing and water level lowering from about 2.5 feet to less than 1 foot. The yellow line is at the site where the first predicted new rockledge prominence is expected. Next slide, please. The velocities are expected to increase in this area somewhat, but not significantly. You can see it is still generally in the blue, maybe a little bit lighter blue there where that rock ledge is expected to be. Next slide, please.
Correct.
All right, Tom, please continue.
So, thank you. So to further assist the visualization of the change in this area, here's a recent photograph of the Royal River as viewed from the Beth Condon pedestrian bridge, looking downstream at US Route 1. along with a 3D view of the model of about the same perspective, showing the TSP water levels. Note that the vertical scale of the model is exaggerated by 3 times, which becomes apparent if you look at the bridge abutments. You see that they're way too big compared to the photo on the right. But there are some things that we can visualize here, such as you do see the piers. The yellow line is showing where the approximate existing water level is, and then the blue shaded area is where the TSP predicted water level is going to be. So you can see that it is both lower and more narrow. Looking in the background of that image, you can see the Sparhawk Mill, and about where the water appears to end is where the Bridge Street Dam currently is. Next slide, please. So turning from that point on the Beth Condon pedestrian bridge and looking upstream is this next set of pictures. So for the photo, you can see that it's pretty still water, and you might be able to see the Middle Falls in the background. And then looking at the model, once again, the model heights are exaggerated in this by that same factor of 3. But what you can see is that there is rock ledge in the foreground and Middle Falls is in the background. I just want to stress, though, that even though these might look like puddles, it will actually most likely be a rocky cascade or a set of pools and riffles. And I'll discuss that a little bit more in the next slide. Next slide, please. So the rock ledge in this area was observed during a planned drawdown of water levels at the Bridge Street Dam on November 12th, 2014, as shown in the photo on the left. This matches the available sediment probing data that has been collected that shows that there is a rock ledge, hard bottom, right along that same area. And it also found, that same sediment probing data also found that there was shallow cobbles and rock just a short distance upstream. Currently, it's unclear if the bathymetry between these two sediment probe locations will be more like a rocky cascade or if it's going to be a pool and riffles with cobbles. But either way, the flow is expected to be continuous through this location. It will be about a 4-foot elevation change in the water surface. So that might be similar to something like near Sparhawk Mill, which is the photo on the right side. You can see that, there is a grade to, or a slope to the water surface going through there. Next slide, please. Okay, so looking again back at the depth comparisons, we are continuing further upstream, and the flows are generally similar again here at the Middle Falls, with approximately 1 foot of depth in the existing conditions, as well as in the tentatively selected plan.
We're looking at here is Factory Island and the channel that goes behind it.
Go ahead.
Thank
Tom.
you. Next slide, please. Okay, so now moving further upstream to the Royal River Park canoe launch behind the Yarmouth Historical Society. sorry, let me just be extremely clear here. We are going to talk about Gooch Island. We're just going to jump over it, and we're going to focus on the canoe launch first, and then we're going to loop back around and still hit Gooch Island. But moving further upstream, looking at the Royal River Park canoe launch behind the Yarmouth Historical Society, we're comparing paddle depths, which are really just flow depths, except that I have changed the gradation of the colors here just slightly. Once again, these are using the annual median average daily flows, so those normal flows, and these are similar to the previous plots, except that the orange colors are depths that are less than 1 foot, and the red colors are depths that are less than 6 inches, indicating that potentially these could be recreational hazards. Due to the TSP impoundment drawdown at Elm Street of approximately 4 feet, across areas across from the canoe launch and also towards the Elm Street Bridge could be problematic for paddling. But flow depths at the canoe launch itself and heading upstream appear to continue to support recreational activities. And in this case, the cross-section is comparing right at the railroad tracks, and you can see that under existing conditions, it's about 10 feet deep there, but then under the TSP conditions, it would only be approximately 6 feet deep. Next slide, please. Okay, so same location, look, and also the normal flows, but this time looking at velocities. Looking closer in this area, we can see that the flow velocity is predicted to remain low near the canoe launch in the order of 1 or maybe 2 feet per second. So this would unlikely be problematic for you to be able to load and get into your canoe and get launched. Next slide, please. Okay, so still looking at the same location, but this time looking at the drought conditions. So during the very low flow periods, such as the 7Q10, the paddle depths near the canoe launch appear to continue to support recreation in the upstream direction. However, you can see that there is a rocky prominence, or the second rock ledge is located between the Historical Society and the East Elm Street Bridge. And that would be a barrier to paddling. Next slide, please. Okay, so continuing further upstream, this area also appears to support the upstream travel with recreation. You can see that the elevations, this time comparing at the railroad tracks again, are at the Maine Central Railroad tracks, are approximately going from a depth of 12 feet down to only a depth of 8 feet. Next slide, please. And continuing further upstream, you can see still that there appears to be a sufficient depth, going from 14 feet down to 10 feet. Next slide, please. Excellent. At approximately the halfway point near Blueberry Fields Drive, there is narrowing and potentially flow of depth that is approximately about 1.5 feet. Next slide, please. Continuing further upstream, you can see that the depths appear to support recreation activities. Next slide, please. Continuing further upstream near Toddy Brook Lane, you can see there are 3 locations with narrowing and potential flow depths, again, that are approximately 1.5 feet deep. It's not a flat bottom river, so these are approximate depths. Thank you. And now near the upstream end of the study area at Baston Park and Route 9 in North Yarmouth, the TSP flow depths are predicted to be approximately 2 feet lower than existing water levels, yet may be capable to continue to support recreation activities. Next slide, please. Okay, now returning to the Elm Street Dam area for a deeper dive, flow depths along the Royal River near Foundry Brook appear to match in the existing and in the TSP conditions. Although it's not clearly shown here, Foundry Brook itself would become an intermittent stream in the TSP scenario, where obviously in existing conditions it has flow. Similarly, an approximately 300-foot section of Gooch Island back channel is predicted to become intermittent based on currently available data. Next slide, please. And we will zoom in to those areas. This is just an overview. So zooming in to the East Elm Street Dam, immediately upstream of the dam, the TSP water levels are predicted to be approximately 5 feet lower than the existing water levels. Additionally, you can see that the flow path for the stream shifts more towards the center of the channel if you compare the left and the right images. Next slide, please.
Good effort, Karen. Good effort.
Based on available bathymetry, the flow velocity may be increased along the south side of Gooch Island, while the annual median average daily flows are diverted in that direction. Next slide, please. So continuing just a little bit upstream and focusing on the East Elm Street Bridge with the dam on the right side and the rocky ledge on the left side where the yellow line is. You can see that the TSP water levels are predicted to be approximately 4 feet lower than existing water levels in this area. And like I just mentioned, that yellow cross section is the location where that second instance of the new rock ledge prominence is expected to be manifested or exposed by the reduced water levels, rather. Okay, TSP flow velocities upstream of the East Elm Street, though, would be similar to existing velocities under these normal flow conditions. Next slide, please. To further assist visualization of the change in this area, here's a Google Street View of Royal River as viewed from the north end of the East Elm Street Bridge. Looking upstream at the Yarmouth Historical Center canoe launch, along with a 3D view of the model of about the same perspective, showing the TSP water levels. Once again, note that the scale of the model is exaggerated ×3, which becomes apparent when looking at the railroad bridge abutments. Unfortunately, I can't point at the image, but they are the It kind of looks like a little mountain about at the center of that model image. That's where the road abutment is. And then if you come back to a little bit closer to the foreground, you might be able to see the canoe launch ramp on the, I guess in this case, it would be behind the historical center on the left side of the image. And then looking down in the river itself, you can see where the rock ledge is expected to be. Next slide, please. Okay, and so turning and looking downstream from the north end of the East Elm Street Bridge, once again, using Google Street View, you can see Gooch Island and the East Elm Street Dam. Unfortunately, it's difficult to see the dam itself because the water level just kind of disappears. But when you look at the 3D model view, one sees that the TSP water levels and primary flow direction go along the south side of Gooch Island. The portion of the dam not removed in the TSP scenario is also shown. Likewise, behind the that dam remnant portion, you can see an area where it is expected that water in the Royal River below the dam would have some backwater effect and would be in that channel. Similar to the other 3D views, though, the vertical scale was exaggerated by 3 times. Okay, so the comparison of existing and TSP annual median average daily flow depths indicates that TSP flows will be primarily directed south of Gooch Island. In this image, if you might not even see them, but if you see purple lines, those are 2-foot contour interval topography of the model terrain. So these images, once again, are comparing depths, the left side being existing conditions, the right side being the tentatively selected plan. Next slide, please. So this plot compares existing conditions and a full dam removal measure that was considered during the screening process. Full removal of that normal flow, the annual median average daily flow depths, indicates that flows would be normally divided around both sides of Gooch Island. Next slide, please. So looking at the velocities for the 95 percentile upriver peak migration for the fish passage, comparing the existing conditions on the left side and the tentatively selected plan on the right side, indicates likely similar conditions due to low flows, with the flows primarily directed south of Gooch Island. Next slide, please. Similarly, looking at those same 95 percentile exceedance, so the low flows for the fish passage, comparing the existing conditions to the full removal, the velocities indicate that the full removal would likely direct flows primarily to the north of Gooch Island. Next image, please. Slide. Okay, now looking at the velocity associated with the upriver peak migration 5 percentile flow. So these are the higher flows for fish passage. The existing conditions are shown on the left side. The tentatively selected plan is shown on the right. This indicates that the TSP would primarily direct flow south of Gooch Island that would otherwise be flowing on both sides, and is then showing higher flow velocities in that location. Next slide, please. The comparison of existing and full dam removal measures of the peak upriver migration 5 percentile flows show that flow velocities indicate a similar pattern, but increased flow velocities with flow on both sides of Gooch Island. Next slide, please. However, it is important to consider that floods do occur, such as this newspaper clipping from 1983. The article indicates that 40 volunteer firefighters and local residents packed sandbags for flood fighting on this occasion. Next slide, please. This comparison is of the existing and TSP 1% annual exceedance probability, AEP, which is the 100-year return flood event. Looking at the velocities, this indicates that the TSP would reduce the flood levels and flow velocities at a private property near Gooch Island. The flood risk mitigation is not the core purpose of this project. However, it would be a benefit. The white lines shown on this map are from the FEMA digital flood insurance rate map. Next slide, please. So the comparison of the existing and the full dam removal measure, 1% annual exceedance probability, 100-year return annual flow, flood event. The velocities indicate that the full dam removal measure would also reduce some flood levels, but may increase flow velocities near that private property or in the area of that private property near Gooch Island. Thank you for your attention. This concludes the review of the Royal River Section 206 hydraulic study results. Now I'll turn it over to Janet again.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So what I want to do now is just go over the schedule, just so you know what to expect coming up. So we started the district quality control review, and we hope to complete that by the end of August. We are addressing the comments that have been provided. We are a little bit behind schedule now, but we are getting closer to getting this review done. Once that has been completed, then the draft report will move to our Office of Counsel, where a legal review will be completed. And then our aim is to start our next review in mid-September. It's the concurrent review that will include the public review that will basically the report will be released, and we will ask the public, you and the community, to provide comments to us. At the same time, we will ask the resource agencies, the Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, FEMA, the state agencies will also review the report, and also we will have another internal review that will be experts in their field, not in the district, will also review the report. So those 3 reviews will be going on at the same time, which is why it's called a concurrent review. That will last 30 days, and then we will address comments. Hopefully by November, we could provide the report and EA to our division. They will review it. They will send it back to us. Again, more comments. And we will then resubmit the report, finalize the report in April, and hope to receive final approval to move into the next phase of the study. in May of next year. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to remind you about the details of the public review. So the draft report and EA will be provided to you. It will be available on websites. We will make it available to the town, and you'll be able to read it, all of the report and all the appendices that go along with it. As required by the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, you will have 30 days to provide comments. And you could provide comments either via email. There will be a website, an email that will be provided, or you could send us letters. And then we will also hold another public meeting. This time we will come to you in person, so you can talk to the team and ask questions of us then, and we will talk about the entire report and our recommendations going forward. So more information will be available once we get closer to the time where the report is ready for review.
Janet, before the next,
that is what I have.
I was only going to mention for folks, that date has not been scheduled. We're hoping to have that information pretty soon. As soon as the date is available, we'll be doing a town-wide mailer to everybody in town with sort of opportunities to get involved and to share more information about the project. So keep an eye out for that. Just as soon as we figure out what that date is, those mailers will be sent out. So I wanted to throw that out there as a shameless plug. And again, also encourage you to check out the town's website. We've done our best in the last several weeks to add as much information as is readily available to us. There's a pretty thorough FAQ function. So if you have questions specific to this project, they're there. And also feel free to reach out to Karen or I if you have questions after this meeting or throughout the process. So, and also check out social media. We're pushing out information
and videos
online as well. So, thanks, Janet.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's great. Yeah, we haven't set the date yet because there's still some uncertainty. We don't want to set a date and not be able to meet it, and so we're trying to get through this internal review before we can set a date. With that, just want to thank you for your attention and just open it up to questions.
So, I suspect there will be a few questions. Yep. Councillor Casey is going to be going around with a wireless mic for folks who are here in the building. For folks who are online, just as a reminder, there is a raise hand function. If you could do that, if you're interested in sharing a question or asking a question or sharing your thoughts, and we'll make sure that we get to you. But for folks in town, in the log cabin, if you could, which is just a sec.
Making sure it's turned on.
Yep. Okay. Raise your hand. Just introduce yourself for Janet, for Tom, and then feel free to ask your question. And I see Gib, maybe first up once we get the microphone up and working.
You could also come to the podium if you feel comfortable doing that.
If you like, there's a wireless mic here as well if you want to speak.
Megan, is it working? Okay.
My name is Gib Parrish. I live on Sligo Road, and the river's in our backyard. I have three questions. The first question is, what is the reason that the partial removal of the Elm Street Dam is the selected choice at this point?
The question is whether the tentatively selected plan includes partial removal of the Elm Street Dam. And yes, that's...
I know it does include partial removal, but why is partial removal been selected as opposed to complete removal? Is that simply a cost issue, or is there some hydrologic or hydrodynamic reason that you don't want to remove the rest of the dam?
I'll give the answer the Army Corps has given before, and then they're welcome to join in with any more details. And that is that it's a strict cost-benefit analysis, that if you look at the cost of removing part of the dam versus how many fish will be able to pass as a result of that work, you get a certain value. If you add on the cost of removing the rest of the dam, you don't get increased fish passage, and so it's not the best buy for your buck.
Okay, so from the perspective of the fish, partial removal is fine, and you'll get, reasonably good fish movement.
From a fish and budgetary perspective, yes.
Okay, very good. My next question relates to the floodplain above the Elm Street Bridge, and if the river level is lowered by about, on average, roughly 4 feet, which is my understanding of what you did, which you found, would that impact the floodplain level above the Bridge Street Dam area compared to what it is now? Elm Street, my mistake.
I will offer to take that question. So I don't have slides prepared to show that today. However, the amount of reduction during the 100-year event is very slight. There is some reduction upstream of the East Elm Street Dam. However, it is minimal and likely less than a foot in the areas, and the amount of reduction decreases in the upstream direction. We will have extensive slides that will show, similar to the ones that we went through today, that will show all of the locations and how those compare to the current FEMA flood maps.
Good, thank you. And you answered the first question when you answered the first one that I asked, so I'm finished.
I
Thank
wanted
you,
to quickly recognize, just so we don't lose track. After Gordy, I see Phil Bryson. We'll get to you after Gordy.
Good evening. My name is Gordon Clark. My wife Gail and I live at 161 East Elm Street, perched on the northern end of the East Elm Street Dam. Incidentally, for the Army Corps people, my grandfather proudly served with the Army Corps of Engineers in World Wars I and II and rose to the rank of colonel. I thank you for your collaborative efforts with our town, but I respectively must ask a couple of questions related to your temporarily selected plan. Given that retaining half of the East Elm Street Dam will block the flow of the Royal River's North Branch around Gooch Island, resulting in the degradations of the ecosystems of both the river by causing standing, potentially stagnant water, and the island by allowing year-round access rather than the usual 1 to 2 months in the summer, how can what you identify as a plan for, quote, aquatic ecosystem restoration, unquote, possibly allow for the desecration of parts of that ecosystem? And are you aware that this particular section of the river is a fishing ground for the endangered black-crowned night heron? Thank you.
Thanks, Gordy.
I'll start by addressing that. Thank you, Mr. Clark, for your question. And it's so nice to know about your family history with the Corps of Engineers. It's nice to know that your family was part of our family at one time, the Corps family. So, and I understand your concern about Gooch Island. The decision that was made looking specifically at fish passage and not at the impacts to Gooch Island. What we foresee is that there would be intermittent water flow on that north or left descending bank, depending on the water level in the river. So at some time, at low flows and normal flows, there'll be less water moving through, or maybe none. And at higher levels, there would be water moving through it. There is uncertainty in our modeling, but definitely flows would be reduced, and at times it would probably not have flows. At the same time, we're not sure if we could define the change to Gooch Island as being negative. What you would probably see is the creation of freshwater wetlands behind in that side channel. So I don't know if it would be necessarily a negative change. It would just be a change. But we do understand your concern. With the way the Corps assesses the different measures, we have to look at a cost-benefit analysis, and we used fish passage as our benefit. So by removing that additional piece of the East Elm Street Dam, it would increase the cost significantly, but not increase the benefit to fish passage. And that's the reason why we chose this plan. You're getting the best plan to increase fish passage for the cost.
Okay. All right, Phil Bryson, online.
Hi, my name is Philip Bryson. I live on East Elm Street. Is it standard practice for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to calculate the cost per fish per linear foot of dam removal and make recommendations for partial dam removal like this? Is that a normal practice?
Well, normal practice for the Corps of Engineers when it comes to an ecosystem restoration project would be to establish a metric for benefits to ecosystem restoration, and then compare the costs to that. So we would have in our case, we used fish passage or alewife passage, and compared the amount of the estimated improvement to alewife passage, and compare that to the cost of the different measures, alternative plans that we developed. In other ecosystem restoration projects, you might use a different metric that would for ecosystem restoration. So if you were working to establish oysters in a marine system, you might look at how many acres of oysters you would restore compared to the price. So for each ecosystem restoration study, we determine what would be the benefit, and in this case, it would be the restoration of alewives. So yeah, I guess in the end, long story short, yes, this is the normal way we look at ecosystem restoration studies. Though the metric, the ecosystem, the benefit to the ecosystem would be geared towards that ecosystem.
Phil, I had muted you because we were getting some feedback, so unmute if you've got any follow-ups.
Oh.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'm in a loud environment. Okay. Thank you for answering that, Janet. Do the H&H results suggest that full removal of the dam would have any impact, positive or negative, on fish passage? Does it change fish passage at all?
I would
So,
go ahead, Tom.
yeah, thank you for the question. I would refer you back to the last several slides that we had covered, not the ones that were discussing the flood values around Gooch Island. However, there were some that were comparing existing TSP and full removal scenarios for the 5%, 5 percentile and 95 percentile flows that the fish passage design would be based around. In general, though, I would caution you that, you know, the the screening process took many different things into account, and based on the information that we have collected so far, it appears that the TSP would sufficiently be able to pass the fish to justify the cost.
Let me clarify my question. If the town chose to remove the remainder of the dam separately from the TSP, would it have any impact on fish passage?
So this is a question that I would hesitate to answer because our fish passage expert is not with us tonight, and I don't want to speak for him just because I'm not an expert in fish passage. I'm, the PM, and so I could definitely take that question to him to ask him what would be that effect. But I'm afraid I could not address that adequately tonight.
Okay, thank you.
For some of these questions that pop up that we may not have answers to, again, that FAQ function that's on the town's website is it's not static. We're constantly adding to it as we receive questions. So just continue to refer back to the town's website, and hopefully we can address those. If not, get back to you directly. So there's a few hands up here, Megan.
Brian McElhenney, this is Christina. We live on Sligo Road, right along the Amtrak line, which you call the Central Maine Railroad. And you may know that a lot of teenagers jump off that bridge all the time. And there's also a large pine tree further down the river that they swing off of. So it'd be important to get a good idea of how deep the water is going to be in those locations. Because although they're told they're not supposed to do it, they still do it. So that's my first question, or just my first point. Second thing would be, you might also know that the river is pretty heavily invaded by invasive plants all along the shorelines, and what will happen to the banks when they're exposed? Will those all just become more buckthorn, or is there any plan to do anything to prevent that from happening? Third question is, other fish, is it just alewives, or are there other species that might benefit from this? Thanks.
So let me jump in. First question, jumping off the bridges. Yeah, that is something that I believe, because the water level will decrease, it is something that you would have to consider in the future to ensure safety. But the banks, the exposed banks. Sorry about that. Yes, in the plan, in the adaptive management plan, we've included funds that we've included a plan to revegetate those exposed banks, both above the Bridge Street, where the Bridge Street impoundment is, and above the East Elm Street Dam. In that impoundment, we plan to seed the area with New England wetlands mixed seeds, so that it would not, to try to reduce the possibility of being vegetated by invasive species. That is definitely a concern that we want to address. The last is, your question was, will this impact other fish species? And the answer to that is yes, but I'm only going to be able to give you a general answer only because, again, I'm not the fish expert. There definitely are other migratory species that will benefit from removal of the dams. And also, because like alewives are a resource, a food resource to other fish, it will also increase productivity in the river. So it will also positively affect fish species that live there but are not migratory. There may be negative impacts to fish species that prefer pond-like or lake-like characteristics. Those are probably more of the invasive generalist species. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to go into species, but I know that you're going to see a shift in your fish, the fish species that you're going to see in the river. But it definitely will be an overall positive impacts to your fish assemblage. So hopefully that helps. And I know that in the Maine report, when it comes out, we'll have a lot more information about fish species that will see benefits to this project.
Not sure where the mic is. Megan, do you, oh, you've got it. Okay.
Good evening. Thanks to everybody on this call. My name is Mike Ting. I live at 20 Island Park, which is one of the private properties that is just downstream from the Elm Street Dam. I've got 3 questions for Mr. Muehlbachler. Number one, I appreciate your time and expertise. I know that fluvial dynamics is not an exact science. So having said that, there are definitely some discrepancies between the data and the results from the original Stantec report from 2017 to the ones that you presented tonight. Is that because obviously there are different modeling software? So how do I reconcile those differences in my mind? Is the one that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is using the HEC-RAS modeling software? Is there, I mean, how accurate is this modeling compared to, let's just say, the software that's being used by Stantec? So that's my first question. The second question is, with the modeling pictures that you've shown us today, those are all based on historically collected data. And I think everyone in this room realizes that the climate change is real and it's coming on fast. So this is what you're showing me now for what the river would look like a year, 2 years, 3 years, I don't know. But is there any modeling that's available for some of the predicted changes that everybody is saying is happening within the next 5 or 10 year time frame? Now I'll just stick with 2. I think there are other people who have questions.
Thank you for those questions. So to the first point, HEC-RAS is the same software that Stantec had used for their studies. More explicitly, I shamelessly stole parts of their study to be used in the study, this update. But as you alluded to, there are significant differences. Probably one of the most significant is that the Stantec model is based on one-dimensional hydraulic modeling. What that means is that there is a line that is drawn across the river, and there's an assumption that along that line, the water level is exactly the same all the way across the river. Actually, that's not 100% true. It's that the energy grade line, accounting for friction losses and velocity, acceleration, and things like that. But if we simplify it, we'll just call it the water surface is the same all the way across the river. That simplification sometimes can be acceptable, but if you have data that you can calibrate, the two-dimensional modeling that we are using, once again, it's because we're using a newer version of the same software. The two-dimensional, what that does is we're able to create a mesh over the terrain, and then it doesn't need to be a perfect grid. It can be, we can change the shape of that mesh to more closely follow features such as a dam spillway, or maybe the banks of the river, in ways that the outline of each one of those mesh cells is effectively its own cross-section. So we are significantly increasing the numbers of these computations and the horsepower to be able to perform these computations. But at the end of the day, there is still uncertainty. We relied very heavily on the USGS stream gauge that is at First Falls. And so when we calibrated, what we had done is we had tried to get our results to match what the USGS is using when they publish their results for what the discharge is at the Royal River at that location. And we generally got it to match relatively closely. But the problem is that the Royal River is pretty long, and the assumptions that we made trying to get it to match at that one point might not necessarily still apply up at East Elm Street or up at Baston Park, right? It would be better if we had stream gauges all along and we could really make a very calibrated and tight model where we would know exactly what the water levels are going to do. As it is, though, we tried the best with the available data that we have. So there is some uncertainty, but again, we are trying the best with the data that we have. On the question of historically and climate change.
I'm sorry, this is Karen. Can I stop there and just ask a question before you move on to the second one? If we look at the Stantec report versus what you've modeled, for example, in the area of the Yarmouth History Center and the East Elm Street Dam, would you say that one of the reasons that there's a difference is that Stantec may have made different assumptions than you did regarding soft sediment versus bedrock?
That's also a very good question, yes, and a very good observation.
I think you told me that, so that's why I asked.
Yeah, there are assumptions that we have made in performing this modeling. As an example, we're not looking at ice flows. We're assuming that there's not any sort of woody debris, clogging things up, right? In real life and with nature, things are, it varies and things are complicated. One of the assumptions, though, that Karen was just alluding to is regarding the limitations of our bathymetry. We attempted to collect the bottom conditions information immediately upstream of both of the dams. Unfortunately, when we, and that had been a contracted effort, unfortunately, when that was attempted, it was not possible to do so in a safe manner. And so there's still a question mark if the bathymetry data that we have, if that is reflecting soft sediments or if those are perhaps harder rock. So for the purposes of us making assumptions to be able to keep the modeling going forward and the project going forward, we chose to go ahead and assume that the sediments upstream of the East Elm Street Dam are that are basically all sediments, all of the bathymetry through the model are fixed and they do not erode out. Now, we did also do some sensitivity testing to check that assumption and to bracket what the anticipated range of uncertainty there could be based on that assumption. I don't have those numbers in front of me for tonight, but I would say that those are going to be in that technical appendix. So those certainly could be other assumptions that that Stantec might have made differently than what we have.
Bill, before you, I don't want to lose track of folks online. I see Tread McIntyre has his hand up. We'll go on there.
But we still have a second question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
About the
Looking for
climate
natural
change
pauses
impacts
here.
in 5 to 10 years.
Right. So 5 to 10 years is going to be really short for climate change. And there is going to be a separate climate change appendix. I am not the author of that. I have been given some of the conclusions, and I'm just going to hit a couple of the very high points, but I would certainly encourage you to wait for detailed questions for the author of that. So number one, recent climate, global, regional, and site-specific literature indicates that observed trends of rising mean and extreme temperatures. The literature is a bit more vague, however, on the projected stream runoff trends, but it does indicate a mildly increasing mean annual flows. So the projections indicate less snow melt with more runoff during the spring migration season, with warmer summers and less runoff during the late summer and fall. Now, the horizon for that, I don't think is 5 to 10 years. One of the other findings is that it is expected that by the middle of the 21st century, that late summer warming would lead to decreases in the minimum stream flows in the late summer and early fall. And then another point, and I'll leave it at this one, is that sea level is known to be rising, although there is not yet consensus about the rate of that change. There's much more information. There's an entire appendix on this topic. Thank you.
Sorry for cutting you off there, Mike. We will now go to Tread, and then we'll go to Bill.
Okay. Hi, my name is Tread McIntyre, and I live on Park Street, which is near the East Elm Street Dam. I'm a neighbor of Mr. Clark's, and I'm interested in the North Branch, obviously, around Gooch Island. I just wanted to ask, and I guess the question's really for Ms. Coate. Just wanted to ask what your confidence level is in the projections of the increased fish migration, and whether you do follow-up measures of the accuracy of your projections just to sort of fine-tune it as you do more and more of these sorts of studies. That's my first question. Second question is, if there's downstream contamination as a result of the TSP being implemented, and I'm sure you're aware that at one point in the past, Central Maine Power had a pole dipping station where they dip poles in preservatives further upstream. If any of the sediments there that are released contaminate further downstream, whose liability is that? Is that a liability of the Army Corps? Is it the town's liability? And then the last point I want to make, I'll wrap it up quickly, is it's really a suggestion. I know you've done a very detailed cost-benefit analysis looking at the cost of the dam removals and the improved the value of the fish migration. But it would be nice if somehow the cost of the lost recreation value was included in the cost benefit analysis. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. The question regarding fish migration would have to be answered by our environmental person who did the analysis. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to speak to that, but I can tell you that once a project has been completed, or once we have, there are two different things. Once a project has been implemented, we have an adaptive management element to it. So we go back and assess we can assess the success of the project. Also, we do have a practice of going back to our ecosystem restoration projects later on to see if they are fulfilling their goal. So we do come back and check to make sure our projects are successful. Downstream contamination, who is liable? I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. I'm not as versed in CERCLA or RCRA. From the evidence that we've seen through our collection, our data collection and Stantec's data collection, we just aren't seeing contamination other than what you might see in like localized road runoff. And if you were attended our meeting previously when Ben talked about his sampling efforts, what we're seeing are localized sites of PAHs and BDX. And they seem to be the same sites, and they seem to be from runoff from the roads. That report is online if you want to read it. And then also the Stantec, I would suggest reading the Stantec reports as well. I'm afraid I don't, like I said, I don't know the liability. And thank you for your suggestion about loss of recreation. I don't I don't know as much about that being able to add that particular element to our studies. But thank you for the suggestion. I could definitely take it back to policymakers and talk to them about that kind of adding that kind of information to our analysis.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Cook. Just one follow-up question on the testing of the sediment. How far upstream did the testing occur? I mean, I looked at some of the reports and I thought it was not more than 100 yards north of the Elm Street Bridge or dam.
I'm sorry, I don't have the report in
Okay,
front of me.
all right.
I'm afraid I couldn't tell you that exactly right now. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank
But
you.
we didn't, if you're asking if did we go all the way up the impoundment, we did not. We did not. We focused on filling data gaps that from the previous study, but it was upstream, immediately upstream of the East Elm Street Dam.
Okay, thank you.
And to Tred's question, we're digging into this a little bit deeper as well, as I think everybody is probably aware. The former CMP pole yard on Sligo Road is a remediated brownfield site. They dipped utility poles in creosote. That site has since been sort of voluntarily cleaned up by Central Maine Power. The town owns about 30 acres sort of adjacent in between that site and the Royal River. And so, what we're learning is that creosote is a pretty slow-moving subsurface. The site has been encapsulated and is being maintained. And so we're not seeing any sort of immediate concerns from DEP. But again, we're continuing to look into that because it's a good question. And again, with a potential liability attached with it, we want to make sure we know we have all the sort of most up-to-date information on that. Bill, you've been very patient. Thanks for hanging in.
My name is Bill Dunn. With respect to the part of the East Elm Street Dam that you're not going to take down or are not proposing to take down, what is the condition of that dam? And then looking to the future, is it safe to assume the town would be responsible for future maintenance and any liabilities associated with that? And has that future cost of maintenance been present worth and factored into the economic analysis that results in you proposing not to take it out?
I think the town can take this one. Janet?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. So the Army Corps' cost-benefit analysis does not consider the town's operations and maintenance costs presently or going forward. So when they say, here's what the best bang for your buck is, they're not taking into account expenses that we might have from leaving something up or taking it down. And then as for that particular location, we have recorded information that's recorded with the property records that the town is responsible for maintaining or taking down that dam or that wall, and in doing so, protecting the Clark property. It's in their recorded deed. And so that is the operations and maintenance thing that is ongoing for us, and we have to make a decision about what to do about it. And Scott is looking into what the cost would be for all the different options that we have with that part of the wall, so we know what our options are. But it is not in good shape, and the part that is directly next to the Clark's residence is not in good shape, and they have alerted us to that.
Yeah, I think just to add on to that, yeah, as part of the sort of the town's evaluation of the different alternatives, whether it's a TSP or a locally preferred plan or some sort of third option, we're actively getting sort of working with engineers to get a sort of an assessment of current condition. It would include any type of improvements that would be necessary for sort of the partial dam staying in place. Also, there's an opportunity to perhaps look at some alternatives if we're going to. Popular guy. If we continue to go forward and want to look at some local alternatives like notching the dam to allow for additional water flow or others, we'll be able to assess that as well. That said, That said, we do know that it's, again, with whatever scenario the town decides to move forward, there needs to be a commitment to properly maintaining and improving the dam structures.
Okay.
Steve?
Hello, my name's Steve. I live in Yarmouth on the Royal River. You mentioned the flow depth would support paddling at the Historical Center. What about velocity of flow with respect to canoe and kayaking during the more shallow river flow, aka summer, or more moderate flow like May or June? Additionally, you mentioned the Foundry Brook would be an intermittent stream with low flow. At what flow rate would the volume begin to decrease down the Foundry Channel, and at what flow rate would it stop? Additionally, you mentioned fish passage is the main benefit of what we're looking at. What are the risks or challenges or other assumptions you're not mentioning? For instance, you mentioned modeling initially doesn't do well with steep cascading flow, and we really didn't focus much on Gooch Island with the original tentatively selected plan. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. So I'll try to address them in order. I'm afraid that I do not have I do have the model, but I don't have everything prepared at my fingertips to be able to answer the question about the velocities at the canoe launch. In general, I believe that the exhibit that was included in the presentation was showing that the velocity during the normal flows was approximately 1 to 2 foot per second in the downstream direction. During the drought conditions, we would expect that to be less because in general, there's just less water moving. There's less flow. And so the water would be generally shallower and moving slower. Now, for the other situations with higher flows, that would, yes, you're right. The flows during June or July, or maybe some other points during the year when flows are higher, it would make sense that the velocities could be higher. We did not explicitly review those areas throughout the entire year. We just focused on the drought conditions and the normal flows, if you will. Okay, I'm sorry. I should have written these down. Could you, let's see, the
no problem, sir. Just go back. The Foundry Channel stream, low flow rate, at what volume would it begin to decrease, and at what rate would it stop? You mentioned it was going to be an intermittent stream at some point.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Thanks for the reminder. So the main reason that we believe that Foundry Channel would stop flowing is because of the 4-foot depth reduction due to the East Elm Street Dam being removed or partially removed in the TSP. And so based on the inverts that we have measured at the culvert below Elm Street, we believe that that amount of depth reduction in the impoundment, that flow would no longer be able to make it through the culverts and down the channel. So during normal flows, during low flows, the drought conditions, we would expect it to be dry. However, during larger storm events, and I can't quantify this except for the events that we looked at, but for the 2-year event, 10-year event, 100-year event, we would expect that the Foundry Channel would be behaving and discharging very much similarly to the way that it does now.
So generally speaking, you expect that to be on a normal day a dry stream bed.
Correct.
Okay. That stinks. That was a nice part of the park there. And then lastly, I said fish passage was the benefit we're looking at, but what are the risks or challenges or other assumptions that we're not mentioning? For instance, you said your model does not do well with steep cascading flow. I would think generally that's what we're looking at with the Elm Street Dam being steep cascading flow. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Thank you. There are a series of simplifications that we do need to make. So as far as fish passage go, right, the hydraulic models that we have are assumed to be generally representative for feasibility. You have to remember this is a feasibility study. So it's generally representative for feasibility level aquatic organism passage considerations. But in reality, you're talking about, you know, a fish the size of my finger, right? At the falls and other locations within that model domain where you can have localized depths, you know, going around rocks, velocities, you could have vertical accelerations, turbulences, other hydraulic phenomena that, you know, could really affect a target species that's, you know, that small at a scale that's impractical or impossible for 2D modeling to accurately predict. You know, we do the best that we can, but this is something that, you know, it's not cost effective for us to be modeling individual stones, if you will. Similarly, you know, due to, and I think I had discussed this a little bit earlier, you know, due to unknowns regarding the dam construction methods in this area, there is some uncertainty regarding the stream bed directly underneath the dams. You know, we know that they were built on bedrock formations, but the extent to which that bedrock might have been modified is unknown, if it was modified at all. You know, additional bathymetric data upstream of the dams, as I had mentioned earlier, wasn't collected due to safe access constraints. You know, let's see. I think those are the main ones. There, as I had mentioned, though, I guess at different points. So there's different knobs that you could look at, or different lenses you could approach this from. So there's the potential uncertainty in the model calibration due to not having sufficient high water marks or an upstream gauge, you know, that we just have the one gauge at the, that we just have the stream gauge at First Falls. So there is a certain amount of risk in our numbers already due to that. But then there is the additional risk, if you will, of that the sediment data or that the bedrock might be different than what we are currently assuming. These will all generally fit into a basket, though, that we are recommending that this generally be viewed, as Janet had been talking about, an adaptive management sort of perspective that, you know, if we see as we're going through design, or, you know, perhaps even after design, after it's constructed, if we see that there is a problem, then it will be viewed at that time and addressed. Thank you.
On East Elm Street. So I have a few questions. I understand your fish expert isn't here, but I was curious how much water is needed for fish passage. And it was hard to see the modeling from where I'm sitting in the room, but if we're looking at like 6 inches and just above the East Elm Street Dam, and then also like rocky ledges with occasional pools. You know, I'm just curious, like, how that's going to work for fish passage to go through. And that's at average water flow. So then if we're looking at lower water flow, I imagine that there's going to be portions of the river that have even less water for fish passage at that point. And when you're thinking about now Foundry Channel with high flow, more than 6 inches deep, like, how is this going to allow for fish passage over, say, that channel? And I also didn't see in the slideshow any illustration of Factory Channel and Middle Falls and the chipping of the ledge there and what that would look like, and how that would affect flow and flow just above Middle Falls as well. I'm not sure if I just missed that or not, but wanted to see if we could get some data around that area. And I also just wanted to call out, based on some of the other comment about invasive species and then revegetating exposed banks with seed. I just thinking about how the invasives are totally taking over the Royal River Park as it is and choking out full-grown trees. Like, I'm not sure what the seeds are going to have to put up against that. And then also to that, like, we're talking about Foundry Channel now being empty. How are we going to protect that area that's already kind of being encroached upon by invasives to protect that area of our park as well that has a lot of history and is really beautiful?
So a lot of the questions you've asked, I'm afraid we weren't. This would be something we're going to have to address in a different meeting, or I'm going to have to bring it to our environmental team member. With regard to Middle Falls, the plan right now is to build the diversion structure to push more water into the side channel, and then during the adaptive management phase, go in to make sure that enough water is moving through the side channel. And if there are ledges that are too high for the fish to jump, and there were 2 places that were identified in that side channel, then we would go and do chipping. But first we want to see the impact first we want to do the diversion structure first before going into the side channel, because there's no sense doing extra work if we don't have to do it. And thank you for the comment about invasive species. Again, that we will have to wait, and I bring that to our environmental person to address. But yes, definitely making sure that invasives do not colonize those banks is a concern. How much water do fish need to move upstream? I'm afraid, again, I'm not going to be able to answer that question for you tonight, but I will bring it to our fish passage expert.
Okay, who's next?
I was going to say right up front here.
Sure.
For no other reason than it's nice to stretch my legs. Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Qualey. My wife, Laura, and I recently moved in at 294 Portland Street back in March, and I'm originally from Northern Maine, and we always boast about how welcoming and engaged and everything our communities are up there, and it's something that I've cherished for a long time, and I'm very happy to have found it here. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Separately, I'm an attorney, which I feel like does discredit to everything that I just said, so sorry about that. I'm an attorney at Archipelago, and we represent the Yarmouth Boatyard. And our client's primary concern since the inception of this project has always been about the sediment and any contamination that will be moving downriver if the dams are removed. Being at the mouth of the river, they bear the risk of any of that sediment and contamination ending up at their docks and moorings. Certainly, the results of the sediment study offered some reassurance that the amount of both sediment and contamination does not appear to be as significant as feared. However, it's not non-existent. So the sediment study and the town's website note that, and I'm quoting here, the chemicals that were found in a few of the isolated samples above the East Elm Street Dam were at a level that is not expected to impact dredging in the harbor and navigational channel. but how is the town and the USACE preparing for that unexpected? So in the chance that the contamination that does exist does end up impacting dredging, what is the plan? How do we address that? If the total amount of sediment is greater than expected and dredging is required sooner, what is the plan there as well? Do we plan to move up the dredging schedule? And we certainly have the same question that Mr. Tread McIntyre raised too about liability. But putting that liability aside for the moment, even right now, it's just a question of where does that leave us in the meantime? Certainly, those are all factors that we know that this study is trying to take into account. And certainly, we're not indicating one way or the other on it. We just want to make sure that that concern's been raised and that the town is thinking through these thoughts about the unexpected. Because as with any study, you do the best you can. You take into account everything that you can, and you pick the best, currently tentatively selected plan. But that does leave room for the unexpected. So just to the extent that we can, wanted to flag that and hope that we can factor that in and account for it as well.
Great.
So thank you.
Thanks. We just have some follow-up questions. We'll get, I see Phil online, a few more. Mike, go ahead. Oh, and we've got one more over here as well.
I think there's two. Sorry, it's Mike Ting again. Since we're going to keep asking questions. I'm interested in the Middle Falls area because 20 Island Park, where I live, is directly opposite to that area. So when you say that we're going to create a structure to divert some water into the side channel, any idea what that structure would look like? Are we creating another partial wall dam? We're trying to remove two dams. What is the extent of that work?
So, Mr. Tang, also, I just want to say thank you for allowing us to pass through your property to allow us to go into the, to look at that side channel. We do appreciate it. So, not an engineer here, but basically we will be using large stones on the right descending bank to move water. We will have design drawings in the report that you'll be able to see. They're at about a 30 to 35% design level. That's the level that we do for feasibility phase. And then once we move into the design and implementation phase, the designs will be complete, but the report will include design drawing, so you'll be able to see what they look like.
Thank you.
I think that was the question. Was there another question? Sorry, Mr. Ting.
No, that's good. Thank you. I'll save it for later.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Marty Kramer. I live on Sligo Road in North Yarmouth on the river. And I understand there's a statute on the state books that mandates permitting questions of upriver communities. So if a downriver community wants to affect the stream, it has to go through all of the communities in the watershed. How does Yarmouth intend to deal with that? And also, you talk about disseminating information to the Yarmouth populace. North Yarmouth is very affected by this proposal. How do you intend to let us know?
Good questions.
Okay. So, Mr. Kramer, if you could email me the statute that you're referencing, I would appreciate it. If it is the one that Alan Stearns had suggested, it is not applicable as far as I can tell. That would apply to a situation where a dam created a certain water level that a community was counting on, remaining the same. And so there's no agreement with other towns upriver to maintain a certain water level with our dams. That was the statute that Alan Stearns had brought to our attention, former executive director of RRCT, Royal River Conservation Trust. If there's something else that we need to look at, please let me know. And regarding talking to our upstream communities, we have been in direct contact with the North Yarmouth Select Board. Janet Cody presented the same presentation she made to our town council to the select board in North Yarmouth only a couple of weeks later. We let them know about this meeting. We asked them to circulate that information in their community, and we have an open line of communication with your select board.
Also welcome, we meet biweekly with Janet and members of her team. Those meetings are generally just with the project study team, but we take minutes and we post those minutes. Representatives of the North Yarmouth Board of Selectmen, their town manager, others were included in that. And again, I'd welcome anybody who is interested from North Yarmouth or Yarmouth who wants to know and be included on the email list that we send out after those meetings. Send me an email. I'm happy to connect you.
And all of those minutes are now posted on the Yarmouth town website. We have a Section 206 webpage with basically every resource we think we have that you might want to see. So all of the minutes of meetings, if you're not on our stakeholder list, you can go look those up.
Hi, I want to ask a quick question because I have to leave, and I
Councilor
I'll
Casey.
have somebody else do this. My name is Megan Casey. I live in town, and I am a town councilor as well. Janet, do you think that I don't think I saw this in your presentation, but when the final report comes out, I hope we can see this. Your modeling of the river under the TSP showed the various changes in depth pretty well. And also had yellow lines that indicated the previous edge of the river and where it was going to retreat to when the dams come out. Can you, on a model at some point, put like feet on that or inches or whatever it is? It looked in some places like a pretty significant narrowing of the river and other places not so much, but it was hard to tell. Like if I saw that it was 4 feet on each side or 10 feet on each side or whatever, something like that. If we could have a map that showed that at some point, that would be really helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a really great suggestion. Thank you.
I'm painfully aware that we're close to 9 o'clock. So I think we can probably cap questions unless there's anybody who hasn't asked a question yet. Janet had sort of posted the project email that's available on the town's website as well. There's also sort of a question forum for folks on the website as well. If you have questions or comments or suggestions, send them our way. We'll communicate that with the folks at the Army Corps. But I wanted to thank Janet and Tom for their time tonight. There's certainly more information to come out on this, and we look forward to sort of sharing that when it's available. And of course, the slides from tonight's presentation will be available on the website as well for folks who don't want to squint at the screen. They can squint at home. So anyways, again, thank you for all.
Scott, can I say
of course.
just a couple of wrap-up words?
Sure. Go
Okay,
for it.
so what we told you about this meeting is that you were going to find out what the river would look like and behave like and how it would impact recreation. It was a very technical presentation. I think it's important to just boil it down. In terms of velocity, we don't see a lot of change in velocity. In terms of depth, we see in the town of Yarmouth, from the East Elm Street dam location going up to about North Yarmouth, a drop of approximately 4 feet. And then starting around that town line, it peters out to no change or so, 0 to 2 feet around Baston Park. We saw 4 locations where there might be a portage issue, where the water goes to about 1.5 feet or less. That is not the end of the story. That is the end of the scope of work from the Army Corps. It does not mean that this town and our neighbors to the north forever will not be able to paddle. It means that it is the beginning of bringing in an engineer who focuses on water dynamics to say, oh, well, we can just dig this out over here. We can do this over there. It's not the end of the story, but it is good to know that there are only 4 places where they're predicting the water might be that low under normal flow conditions. The other thing I wanted to mention regarding the canoe launch, there was a reference to downstream hazards. Frankly, I don't want anybody going to the canoe launch at the Yarmouth History Center and paddling downstream. It seems like a very dangerous direction to go. I would rather think about the exposed ledge over there as being not a hazard but an opportunity. If you saw where that exposed ledge is between the Yarmouth History Center and the current dam location, that could be a new hangout location. That could be a place where people are sitting on the rocks and with their feet in the water. That could be a whole new use for the Royal River Park area. And I just wanted people to think about not only does change take something away perhaps, it also might add something. And that also being said, I don't think there's any issue with ice skating or skiing as long as climate change permits that river to freeze.
With that, thank you all again. I appreciate you being here. And again, this is sort of the next step in a continued story, and we look forward to chatting with you in the future.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks.